Kevin McCarthy finally became Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives after 15 rounds of votes last week. In his victory speech, McCarthy, now the third most powerful person in the U.S. government, talked about two long-term challenges facing the United States: the debt and the Chinese Communist Party. McCarthy urged Congress to speak with one voice on both of these issues. A few weeks earlier, Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, defended sending an additional $47 billion to Ukraine by saying that it would send a stark warning to other would-be aggressors like the People's Republic of China. Over the past year, U.S. Congress has approved more than $200 billion to keep Ukraine going against Russia, to bolster U.S. semiconductor and clean energy industries against Chinese competition, and strengthen Taiwan's defense against China. Despite Washington being highly polarized these days, the Biden administration has met little pushback from Congress when it comes to spending money on countering Russia and China. Will this change in 2023 with the new Congress in town? How seriously should we take the Republicans' pledge for a spending freeze now that they control the House? Are we looking at a repeat of the 2011 debt ceiling crisis that cost the U.S. its AAA credit rating status and tanked the market? What is more important to America, to defuse the debt bomb or to blow up China? How will this decision affect the financial market outlook and your money? Hi, I'm David Wu, a former Wall Street strategist with a 20-year track record of making actionable predictions about major global change. Welcome to The Money Game, where I take on groupthink, propaganda, and conspiracy theories in my critical analysis of markets, economics, and politics. Before we begin, please hit subscribe and the bell button so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. U.S. federal government debt shot up by a whopping $8 trillion over the past 3 years to reach $31 trillion as of the end of 2022. Even excluding the debt held by government agencies, the outstanding federal debt held by the public is now at $24 trillion. And that is $71,000 for every American, including babies. The ratio of debt to GDP, an indicator of a country's ability to pay back its debt, jumped to 95% at the end of 2022, even with soaring inflation having boosted nominal GDP. But inflation is a double-edged sword. High inflation in 2022 might have inflated away some of Uncle Sam's debt, but high inflation has also driven up the interest rates that the U.S. government has to pay for financing new borrowing and rolling over old debt. Interest payments by the federal government climbed to $736 billion in Q3 last year, an increase of $150 billion compared to the fourth quarter of 2019. Putting this into perspective, interest payments are more than what the U.S. federal government spends on education these days. They're more than all of the research and development spending by both the public and the private sectors. Rising interest payments on U.S. debt are eating up a growing share of the U.S. government tax revenue. This will have negative long-term consequences as it reduces available resources for funding priorities like health, education, and even defense. We will get a glimpse of these negative long-term consequences already in 2023. Debt is just an accumulation of past budget deficits. The U.S. budget deficit is set to widen in 2023. The deficit was already showing clear signs of deterioration since last summer. And then came the 2023 Omnibus bill, passed by the lame duck Congress in December. It will increase non-emergency budget authority for fiscal 2023 by 9%. In addition, the bill provides $47 billion in supplemental funding for Ukraine. Wall Street economists are attaching a 62.5% chance that the U.S. economy will go into a recession over the next 12 months. If a recession materializes, tax revenue will go down and the deficit will get even bigger. If the economy does not go into a recession, interest rates will likely to stay higher for longer, and maturing debt will have to be rolled over at higher interest rates, worsening the deficit. The evolution of the U.S. budget deficit and the corresponding rate of increase of U.S. federal debt over the next few months will have important impact on the market outlook this year. This is because it will determine how soon the debt will hit the debt ceiling right now at $31.4 trillion. The debt ceiling is a uniquely American institution. Under the American Constitution, Congress, and in particular the House of Representatives, is invested with the power of the purse, the ability to tax and spend public money for the national government. Until 1917, U.S. Congress had to approve every loan and every debt instrument issued by the Treasury. Then came World War I, with its unpredictable costs making targeted legislation difficult. As a result, Congress created the debt ceiling with the Second Liberty Bond Act of 1917, which allowed the Treasury to issue bonds and take on other debt without specific congressional approval, as long as the total debt fell under the statutory debt ceiling. Since the end of World War II, Congress and the President have modified the debt ceiling roughly 100 times. The debt limit was increased twice in 2021 alone. The consequence of not raising the debt ceiling is default or massive spending cuts. Because these things are so painful, Congress has seldom hesitated raising the debt ceiling when it becomes binding. Will 2023 be any different? Because the U.S. is the issuer of the world's reserve currency, it can get away with bad policies that would be ruinous for other countries. Other countries are subject to market discipline, but not the United States, the most powerful country on the planet. This means the United States government can take on more debt with little consequences. As a result, the U.S. government has little incentive to maintain fiscal discipline, regardless of whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans in charge. The only difference between these two parties when it comes to fiscal policy is that Democrats usually want to increase spending, while the Republicans usually want to cut taxes. When push comes to shove, neither really cares about a deficit or the debt for that matter. This is why the debt ceiling is a potentially powerful disciplinary mechanism when the stars are aligned. Because raising the debt ceiling requires approval by both houses. In theory, when we have a split Congress, one of the two parties could decide to tie their demand for spending cuts or tax increase to raising the debt ceiling. The Democrats used the debt ceiling to hold the Republicans hostage in 2019. The Republicans did the same to Democrats in 2011. The 2011 debt ceiling showdown was a watershed moment in U.S. political and economic history, because it actually brought about real spending cuts, a very rare accomplishment. But the circumstances around the 2011 fiscal brinksmanship was unique. We had an unpopular president. We had the Tea Party on a mission to reduce the U.S. national debt and deficit. The Tea Party wielded great influence inside the Republican Party after it helped the Republicans regain the majority in the House in the 2011 midterm elections. The Tea Party was ideologically committed to its cause and not beholden to Wall Street or corporate America. The result of the nasty showdown between Obama and the Tea Party was that Obama blinked. The Democrats agreed to major cuts in U.S. government spending over the following few years that helped stabilize the U.S. debt dynamics for a time. Can the Republicans pull off again in 2023 what they did in 2011? Biden's approval rating right now is lower than Obama's in 2011. The Freedom Caucus, founded in 2015 by conservatives and Tea Party members, has leverage within the Republican Party. The Freedom Caucus is the reason why Kevin McCarthy agreed to a House rule change last week that allows just one single lawmaker to force a vote on ousting the Speaker. Under pressure from the Freedom Caucus, McCarthy also agreed to eliminate the so-called Gephardt rule, which in the past has allowed the House to skirt a vote on increasing the debt ceiling. It looks like there will be another bruising fight over the debt ceiling in Washington this year. That may come as early as the summer. Which side will win out? It's hard to say right now because there are many moving parts. But one thing is clear. Freezing spending next year at the 2022 level, a core demand of the Freedom Caucus, will hurt defense spending, especially given how much defense budget has gone up over the last year. But China bashing has become a bipartisan pastime. The Freedom Caucus has 6 months to make the case to the American people that protecting America's global hegemony is going to be expensive. That starting a new arms race with China and Russia is a lose-lose for all countries involved. And that for the US, it will increase fiscal burden, destabilize the US debt dynamics, weaken the dollar's reserve currency status, and raise borrowing costs. Whether the Freedom Caucus succeeds or not in stopping the ticking US debt bomb, the upcoming debt ceiling fight will force America to consider how much it's willing to sacrifice to maintain the unipolar world that it rules over. Whatever it's going to be its decision, it will have huge consequences for the world, the global economy, and financial markets. So stay tuned. If you got something out of this program, please hit like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to learn more about my investment strategy, come visit us at davidwuunbound.com. Thank you for listening.